Everyone in Cedar Creek thought Grace Whitaker was an angel. No one knew she was in love with the man who once took her brother's life. If they did, the whole town would have turned its back on her, and maybe God would have too. The whole town of Cedar Creek thought the Whitakers were perfect. Pastor Samuel Whitaker preached every Sunday about kindness, forgiveness, and family. His wife led the choir. Their daughter, Grace, sat on the front row in a soft blue dress, smiling like sunlight. But behind that smile lived a secret pain the church bells couldn't hide. 7 years earlier, Grace's older brother, Luke, had been killed during a robbery. The man who did it went to prison, but her heart never healed. Before I begin, I want to mention that MY Channel Dreams is having a $200 giveaway to celebrate our subscribers. I can hardly believe so many people are interested in these stories. To participate, it's simple. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like this video, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, a little about yourself, or share a beautiful story. I'd love to know who you are. Now, let's get back to my story. Grace did everything people expected from the pastor's daughter. She played piano during service, helped the children's choir, and smiled until her cheeks hurt. But when she went home, she sat alone in her small room and stared at Luke's photo on the dresser. Sometimes she whispered, "I miss you. I wish I could forgive the man who took you." Every night before bed, she prayed the same words, "Lord, show me how to forgive." But forgiveness didn't come. It was like trying to heal a cut that kept opening again. Her father said time would fix it, but time only made the silence louder. One bright morning, Pastor Samuel called Grace into his study. The smell of coffee mixed with the old leather of his Bible. "Grace," he said, "you've done great work here at the church, but I think you could help even more if you joined the outreach team. They're helping men released from prison." Grace blinked. "Ex-convicts?" He nodded. "Yes. They're trying to start over. You could bring light into their lives." Her stomach twisted. She wasn't afraid to help, but the word prison sent a chill through her chest. "I'll pray about it," she whispered. That night she couldn't sleep. Moonlight slid across her floor while she sat by the window, thinking. What were those men like? What stories lived behind their eyes? For the first time in years, she felt her prayer might finally be answered, just not in the way she expected. 2 weeks later, Grace stood outside New Hope Center, the town's halfway home for men rebuilding their lives. The air smelled of rain and metal. Hammers clanked somewhere inside. She held her clipboard tight. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. Inside, she met men who looked rough but spoke kindly. One talked about his daughter. Another said he was learning to read. Grace listened to each of them, smiling softly. Then she saw him. A tall man with short dark hair and tired eyes stood by the window, mopping the floor. He didn't look up at first. His sleeves were rolled high, showing faded tattoos and scars. Something about the way he moved, slow, careful, almost guilty, made Grace's heart skip. The director came over. "Grace, this is Eli Turner. He just joined our program." Eli turned, meeting her eyes for only a second. He nodded politely, then looked away. Grace smiled back, but a strange shiver ran through her. It felt like she had seen him before, in a dream she couldn't remember. When she left that day, soft rain began to fall. Drops tapped the sidewalk like tiny questions, each whispering the same thing: why did he feel so familiar? Grace didn't know it yet, but the answer would change everything she believed about love, faith, and forgiveness. Grace woke early the next morning with a knot in her stomach. The smell of rain still hung in the air, and the sky looked gray and tired. She couldn't stop thinking about the man she met at the halfway house, the one named Eli Turner. His eyes had a story in them, a sad one, and no matter how much she tried to forget, the memory kept coming back. At breakfast, Pastor Samuel noticed her quietness. "You're thinking about that place again, aren't you?" he asked. Grace nodded. "The people there, they've been through so much, Dad. It's not what I expected." Her father sipped his coffee. "Grace, helping others is good. But don't get too close. Some of those men carry darkness that doesn't just go away." She looked down at her plate, moving her spoon in circles. "Maybe light only works when you bring it into the dark," she whispered. That afternoon, she returned to New Hope Center. The sound of saws and voices filled the air. Inside, she greeted the men with a smile that made the room feel lighter. She carried bandages, water bottles, and her clipboard, walking with quiet confidence. When she reached the far end of the hall, Eli was fixing a broken window frame. The sunlight from outside hit the dust in the air, making it sparkle like tiny stars. Grace stopped for a second, just watching him work. "Need a hand?" she asked. Eli turned around, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You shouldn't be near the glass," he said. "It's sharp." "I can handle it," she said with a small grin. "I've been helping my dad fix things since I was little." He handed her a few nails, and their fingers brushed for the first time. It was nothing, just a touch, but it felt like something lit between them. Grace quickly looked away, her cheeks warm. Eli's jaw tightened like he was fighting thoughts he shouldn't have. They worked quietly for a while. Then she asked, "Do you ever think people can change?" Eli paused. "I think people try," he said slowly. "But the world doesn't always let them." His voice was deep, filled with something heavy. Grace wanted to ask what he meant, but she saw pain flicker across his face and decided not to push. When she left the room, she ran into the center's director, Mrs. Carter, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes. "Grace, the men really like having you here," she said. "Especially Eli. He's been smiling more since you started." Grace smiled politely, but her heart beat faster. "He's a good man," she said softly. Mrs. Carter hesitated. "He's been through a lot. Don't judge him by where he's been, dear. Some people fall because the world never gave them a chance to stand." That night, Grace sat by her window again, her Bible open but unread. She could still hear Eli's voice in her head. She whispered, "Lord, what are you trying to show me?" The next week, Grace started spending more time at New Hope. She helped the men write job applications, taught them how to speak politely during interviews, and even organized a small meal for them on Sunday evenings. Everyone called her Miss Grace, and her kindness made even the toughest men smile. Eli kept his distance most of the time. But sometimes, she caught him watching her from across the room, his eyes soft but full of regret. One day, when most of the others had gone home, Grace saw Eli sitting alone in the yard, staring at the sunset. She hesitated, then walked over. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. He nodded. "Yeah. Sunsets make me think of second chances." She tilted her head. "Do you believe in those?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I didn't. Not until I met someone who made me want one." Grace's heart fluttered. She wanted to ask who he meant, but something about the way he looked at her told her she already knew. Before she could say anything, thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind picked up, and Eli stood, dusting his hands. "You should get home before the storm," he said gently. She nodded, though part of her didn't want to leave. As she walked to her car, raindrops began to fall again, cold and soft against her skin. She looked back once, just in time to see Eli still standing there, his head bowed, his hands clasped like he was praying for something he'd never believed he could have. Grace drove home, her heart full of questions she couldn't yet answer. She didn't know that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was about to begin inside her heart. Days turned into weeks, and Grace's visits to New Hope Center became the most peaceful part of her day. The smell of fresh paint, the sound of laughter, and the warmth of helping others made her heart feel light again. Yet, no matter how many people she met, her eyes always found Eli Turner. Eli was different. He spoke less, worked harder, and never bragged about his past. The other men told jokes, laughed loudly, and teased Grace playfully. But Eli, he kept to himself, moving with quiet care, like a man afraid to break the world around him. One afternoon, Grace brought lemonade for the group. She placed the glasses on a small table, smiling as the men thanked her. Eli stood apart, fixing a shelf in the corner. She walked over, wiping her hands on her skirt. "You've been working all day," she said. "You should take a break." He shook his head. "I don't like breaks. When I stop working, I start thinking." "About what?" she asked softly. He paused. "About who I used to be." Grace didn't know what to say, so she handed him a cup of lemonade. For a moment, their hands touched again. Eli's eyes flickered toward hers, full of a sadness that made her chest ache. "You remind me of peace," he said quietly. Grace's throat tightened. "That's a big word," she whispered, smiling nervously. I'm just doing my job. He smiled faintly. Sometimes doing your job can save someone's life. That night, Grace couldn't stop thinking about those words. She sat at her desk, trying to read her nursing notes, but the letters blurred. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eli's face, his tired eyes, his careful smile, his quiet pain. Her father noticed her distraction during dinner. "Grace," Pastor Samuel said, "you've been far away lately. Is something bothering you?" Grace stirred her soup, unsure how to answer. "It's just, the men at New Hope. They're good people trying to start over. I didn't expect to care so much." Her father sighed. "Caring is good, but don't confuse compassion with connection. Remember who you are." His voice was gentle, but his words sank deep. Grace excused herself early that night and went to her room. She looked in the mirror, wondering what her father would think if he knew how much she thought about Eli. "Lord," she whispered, "please don't let me care for him in the wrong way." The next morning, Grace arrived early at New Hope. The halls were quiet except for the sound of Eli sweeping the floor. He didn't notice her at first, so she just watched him for a moment. His movements were slow, careful, almost like a prayer. Then something strange caught her eye. On the wall near him was a small, cracked mirror. Eli had turned it backward so the glass faced the wall. "Why'd you turn it like that?" she asked curiously. He froze, then said, "I don't look at myself anymore." Grace tilted her head. "Why not?" He took a deep breath. "Because I don't like what I see." The answer hit her like a wave. She didn't understand why it hurt her so much, but she wanted to help him. "Maybe you're not who you used to be," she said softly. He looked at her for a long moment. "You sound like someone who still believes in miracles." "Maybe I do," she replied with a small smile. Before he could answer, Mrs. Carter called Grace from the hallway. Grace turned to go, but she glanced back once more. Eli was still standing by the turned mirror, his reflection hidden, but his eyes followed her until she disappeared. That evening, a storm rolled through Cedar Creek. Grace sat by her window again, listening to the thunder. In the flashes of lightning, she saw her own reflection, and for the first time, she wondered if she was hiding something too. She whispered, "Why does he feel like someone I was meant to forgive?" Outside, rain slid down the glass like tears. And in that quiet moment, Grace didn't know that Eli's secret, the one tied to her brother's death, was slowly waiting to be found. The next Sunday morning, church bells echoed through Cedar Creek. Families filled the pews dressed in their best clothes, smiling like they had no worries in the world. Grace sat on the front row, playing soft notes on the piano as her father preached about forgiveness. But while everyone's eyes were on the pulpit, Grace's mind was miles away. Every word her father spoke, mercy, grace, second chances, hit her heart like a whisper meant just for her. She thought about Eli and the pain hiding behind his quiet eyes. She also thought about Luke, her big brother, whose smile she still remembered more clearly than her own. When the service ended, people surrounded Pastor Samuel to shake his hand and praise his sermon. Grace slipped out quietly through the side door, holding her Bible close to her chest. She walked down the dirt path behind the church until she reached the small graveyard. The air smelled of wet grass and roses from the morning rain. Birds hopped along the headstones, singing softly as if guarding the peace of the dead. Grace knelt beside Luke's grave, brushing leaves away from his name carved in the stone. "Hey, Luke," she whispered. "Dad preached about forgiveness again. You'd probably laugh if you heard it. You always said he could make anyone feel guilty in 15 minutes. A sad smile crossed her face. "I'm trying to forgive the man who took you, Luke. I really am. But how do I forgive someone I don't even understand?" The wind blew, lifting strands of her hair across her face. She closed her eyes and felt the sting of tears. For a moment, she thought she could almost hear Luke's laugh, the one that always made her believe everything would be okay. A deep voice broke the silence behind her. "Grace?" She turned. It was her father. He looked tired, his eyes soft but worried. "You've been coming here a lot lately," he said gently. "Is it helping?" Grace nodded. "It's the only place I can talk to him." Pastor Samuel walked closer, his shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. "I'm proud of your work at the halfway home," he said, "but you need to be careful. Those men carry their own ghosts. Sometimes when you try to help someone else heal, you reopen your own wound." Grace lowered her head. I'm not trying to save them, Dad. I'm just trying to understand them. He sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. You have a good heart, Grace. But remember, light attracts both good and bad. Don't let compassion lead you into danger. His words stayed with her long after he left. She sat alone, listening to the rustle of leaves, and whispered to the headstone, Do you think I'm making a mistake, Luke? The wind didn't answer, but deep down, Grace felt something shift. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something you waited for, it was something you practiced, even when it hurt. That evening, Grace drove past New Hope Center on her way home. The building glowed in the sunset, and she spotted Eli outside, stacking wooden boards with the other men. He glanced up and saw her car, lifting his hand in a small wave. She waved back, her heart suddenly calm. For the first time in years, the weight on her chest felt lighter. She didn't know why, but being near Eli made her believe forgiveness might actually be possible. She whispered to herself, maybe this is how healing begins, slowly, one person at a time. But as she drove away, a flash of guilt crossed Eli's face. Watching her car disappear, he whispered under his breath, If she only knew who I really am. The truth stayed locked inside him, like a ghost that refused to rest. Eli Turner hadn't slept for days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same thing, a flash of light, a gun shaking in his trembling hands, a loud bang, and a boy falling to the floor. He woke up gasping for air, sweat covering his face. The sound of that gunshot never left his mind. Before I begin, I want to mention that MY Channel Dreams is having a $200 giveaway to celebrate our subscribers. I can hardly believe so many people are interested in these stories. To participate, it's simple. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like this video, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, a little about yourself, or share a beautiful story. I'd love to know who you are. Now, let's get back to my story. The days at New Hope Center moved slowly, but Eli's guilt only grew heavier. He kept his distance from Grace, afraid of the truth sitting like a ticking clock inside him. He couldn't understand why she cared so much about him, or why her kindness felt like punishment. Every time Grace smiled, he thought about Luke Whitaker, the boy whose life ended because of his mistake. He remembered Luke's frightened eyes that night at the gas station, the way he'd begged, Please don't shoot. Eli hadn't meant to pull the trigger. It had just happened. But that didn't matter. A life was gone, and he was the reason. Now here he was, standing in front of Luke's sister, pretending to be someone new. Grace noticed his silence more and more. She often found him sitting alone at the edge of the yard, staring into the distance like he was waiting for something, or running from it. One afternoon, she brought him a sandwich wrapped in paper. You skipped lunch again, she said, handing it to him. He hesitated before taking it. Thank you. You look tired, she said gently. He nodded. I don't sleep much. She smiled softly. You should try talking to someone. Sometimes that helps. Eli forced a small grin. You think talking can fix everything? Not everything, she replied. But it's better than hiding. Her words cut deep. Hiding was all he'd done for years, hiding behind work, behind silence, behind lies. That night, Eli sat on his bed in the small dorm room of the center, staring at a blank piece of paper. He had tried to write this letter 100 times before, but he could never finish it. This time, he did. The letter read. Grace. Before I met you, I didn't believe in mercy. I thought forgiveness was something for people who hadn't done what I did. But you make me see hope again. There's something I should have told you from the beginning, but I was too much of a coward. 7 years ago, I took a life. The boy's name was Luke Whitaker. I swear to you, it was an accident. I never meant to hurt him. I've carried his name in my heart every day since that night. I didn't know you were his sister until I saw your file at the center. That's when I wanted to disappear, but something told me to stay and try to make it right. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know the truth. I'll be gone by morning. Eli. The next morning, Grace arrived at New Hope early. The sun was barely rising. She found the envelope on her desk with her name written neatly on it. She opened it slowly, her heart thudding. As she read, her breath caught. The words blurred, her hands shook, and the room began to spin. No, it can't be, she whispered, pressing her hand to her mouth. The paper slipped from her fingers and floated to the floor. For a moment, everything went silent, no sound of footsteps, no birds, no laughter from the yard outside. Just the heavy sound of her heartbeat. She read it again, hoping she was wrong. But every word stayed the same. Eli, the man she'd trusted, the man she'd started to care for, was the same person who had taken Luke's life. Grace's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor. Tears poured down her face as she whispered, "God, why him? Why did it have to be him?" Mrs. Carter knocked on the door softly. "Grace? Are you all right?" Grace quickly wiped her tears, folded the letter, and whispered, "I have to go." She drove through Cedar Creek like a storm, the letter clutched in her trembling hand. The world outside blurred through her tears. When she finally stopped, she wasn't sure how she ended up parked in front of Luke's grave. She stepped out, her shoes sinking into the wet grass. "Luke," she cried softly, holding the letter against her chest. "He's the one. Eli's the one who," her voice broke before she could finish. The wind blew hard, scattering leaves around her. She fell to her knees, crying until her voice turned to whispers. "I trusted him. I cared for him. How could he do this to you, and to me?" But deep inside, another voice spoke, one she didn't want to hear. "He told you it was an accident. He stayed to make it right." Grace shook her head, refusing to listen. She folded the letter tightly and whispered, "I'll never forgive him." Yet, even as she said it, she wasn't sure she meant it. That night, Eli packed his bag, his eyes red and swollen. He took one last look at the cross hanging in the hallway of the center and whispered, "I'm sorry, Luke. I'm sorry, Grace." As he stepped out into the cold air, lightning flashed across the sky, like heaven itself had seen his sin. And far away, Grace sat in her dark room, holding the letter, still crying, not just for what she'd lost, but for what she didn't know how to stop feeling. Grace didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor beside her bed, still holding Eli's letter. The candle by her window had burned out hours ago, but she didn't move. The paper was wrinkled and damp from her tears. Every word felt like a knife in her chest. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to erase every memory of his smile, his quiet laugh, the way he looked at her when she talked about hope. But her heart refused to listen. Every time she thought of his crime, her mind showed her his kindness instead. The way he fixed broken things, the way he never let anyone eat alone. The anger came and went like waves. One minute she wanted to see him, the next she wanted to scream at him. She whispered to herself, why did it have to be him? Of all people in the world, why him? Outside, the rain finally stopped, but thunder still rolled in the distance. The air felt heavy, like the sky itself was mourning with her. The next morning, Grace didn't go to church or the halfway home. She couldn't face anyone, not her father, not the men, and especially not Eli. She sat by the window, watching children walk to school with umbrellas and laughter. The world looked so simple for them, so clean. But hers wasn't clean anymore. It was messy, full of love that felt like sin. Around noon, there was a soft knock at her door. It was her father, Pastor Samuel. "Grace," he said gently, "you missed morning prayer. Are you all right?" Grace turned her face away. "I'm fine, Dad. Just tired." He stepped inside. "You've never been just tired before. Is it about the halfway home?" She wanted to tell him everything, to confess, to cry, but the words got stuck in her throat. If her father knew the truth, it would break him. Pastor Samuel sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have a good heart, Grace. But some people carry storms inside them. Be careful not to stand too close, or you'll drown with them." When he left, Grace buried her face in her hands and whispered, "It's too late for that." That evening, Grace drove toward New Hope Center without meaning to. The sky was painted orange and gold, the air still wet from rain. She parked outside the gate and saw Eli sitting alone by the chapel steps, his bag beside him. He looked lost. His eyes were red, his hands clasped tightly together. When he saw her car, he stood slowly, guilt covering his face. "Grace," he said, his voice rough. "I wasn't expecting you." She stepped out of the car, her face pale but calm. "You were just going to leave?" "I thought it would make things easier," he said. "For who?" she asked sharply. "For me or for you?" Eli's shoulders dropped. Both of us. Grace's voice trembled. You lied to me. I did, he said quietly. Because I was afraid. Afraid you'd hate me before I could show you that I'm not the same man anymore. Tears filled her eyes again. You killed my brother, Eli. He nodded slowly. And I live with that every day. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the truth before I left. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the wind filled the space between them. Then Grace whispered, I hate that I still care. Eli looked down. Then hate me if you have to. But don't lose your heart because of me. She turned away, wiping her tears. You took my brother's life, and somehow, you also took my peace. Without another word, she walked back to her car. Eli didn't stop her. He stood there, watching the taillights disappear into the dusk, his heart breaking quietly in the dark. That night, Grace sat at her desk, her Bible open but unread. Her tears fell on the pages as she whispered, Lord, how do I love someone I'm supposed to hate? Outside, thunder echoed one last time, and deep inside her, something cracked open. Not forgiveness yet, but something close. Something like mercy trying to find its way in. By Monday morning, whispers had already started spreading through Cedar Creek like wildfire. It began with a single sentence, someone saw the pastor's daughter talking to a man from the halfway house after dark. And by noon, that one rumor had turned into 10. Some said she was helping the prisoners find jobs. Others said she had fallen for one. At the local bakery, 2 church women whispered over their coffee cups. She's spending too much time down there, one said. I heard he's dangerous. The other shook her head. That poor Pastor Samuel. Can you imagine how embarrassed he must be? By the end of the day, everyone had something to say about Grace Whittaker. Grace felt the stares before she even heard the words. When she walked through town to buy groceries, people greeted her politely but then whispered as soon as she passed. Children pointed. Women smiled too sweetly. Men shook their heads. At first, she told herself it didn't matter. She had nothing to hide, at least, that's what she tried to believe. But the truth burned in her heart like a secret she couldn't carry much longer. That evening, when she got home, her father was waiting at the kitchen table, his Bible open but unread. His face looked tired. Grace, Pastor Samuel said softly, we need to talk. Her stomach turned. Is it about the rumors? He nodded. You know how small this town is. People talk, and not all of them are kind. Some say you've grown, close to one of the men at New Hope. Grace lowered her eyes. They don't know the truth. Then tell me, he said, his voice calm but firm. What is the truth? Grace opened her mouth, but the words tangled inside her. How could she tell him that the man she'd been helping was the same one who had taken Luke's life? How could she say she cared for him anyway? She stayed silent. Her father exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. Grace, I'm your father, but I'm also a pastor. People expect us to live without flaw. If they believe you're involved with one of those men, it could destroy everything I've built here. His words pierced her heart. So reputation is more important than forgiveness, she asked quietly. He looked at her with pain in his eyes. Forgiveness isn't weakness, Grace. But you can't let emotion blind you to consequence. The world doesn't understand the kind of mercy you believe in. Tears welled up in her eyes. Then maybe the world's the one that's blind. She stood up and walked out before he could stop her. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. She walked down the empty street, the wind brushing her face. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, but they sounded sad now, like a warning. Grace stopped by the bridge that overlooked the river. The water shimmered under the moonlight, moving quietly, like time itself refusing to stand still. She whispered, I don't know what's right anymore. Behind her, footsteps approached softly. It was Mrs. Carter, the director from New Hope. Grace, she said, her voice kind. People will always talk. But don't let their noise drown out the truth inside you. Grace turned to her, her eyes filled with confusion. But what if my truth hurts everyone I love? Mrs. Carter placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Then you pray for courage. Because sometimes the right thing breaks your heart before it heals your soul. Later that night, Grace looked out her window toward the lights of New Hope Center in the distance. She could see the faint glow of the chapel, the place where Eli often prayed when he thought no one was watching. Her heart ached. The town saw a sinner. Her father saw a scandal. But when she looked at Eli, she saw something no one else did, a broken man trying to be whole again. She whispered, "Lord, if this is wrong, then why does it feel like the only thing that's real?" Outside, the wind carried her words away, but deep inside, Grace knew something had changed. The world might judge her tomorrow, but tonight, she finally stopped judging herself. Eli hadn't left his room for 2 days. The other men at New Hope whispered about him, wondering what was wrong, but no one dared to ask. He sat on his narrow bed, staring at the same folded letter Grace had returned to him. The words were his, yet seeing them in her handwriting, creased, stained with tears, felt like a punishment he deserved. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. Every sound reminded him of that night, the gunshot, the scream, and the silence that followed. He pressed his palms against his eyes and whispered, "God, if you're real, tell me what to do. Because I don't know anymore." Meanwhile, Grace was at home, pacing her room. She hadn't been to the church, and she hadn't seen Eli since she found out the truth. The whispers around town had grown louder, and her father's patience thinner. But none of that hurt as much as her own heart did. She looked at the letter on her desk, the one that had changed everything. She picked it up again, read the first line, "Before I met you, I didn't believe in mercy," and dropped it, her tears falling fast. Finally, she whispered, "I need answers." That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, she drove toward New Hope Center. The sky was bruised purple and orange, thunder rolling faintly in the distance. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. When she arrived, Mrs. Carter was locking up. "Grace," she said softly, surprised. "You shouldn't be here this late." "I need to see Eli," Grace said, her voice shaking. Mrs. Carter hesitated, then nodded slowly. "He's in the chapel." The small chapel behind the center glowed with candlelight. Eli sat at the front row, his head bowed, hands clasped together. He didn't look up when Grace entered. She stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. The only sound was the rain starting to tap against the windows. Finally, she whispered, "You should have told me." Eli turned slowly, his eyes red and tired. "I know." Her voice trembled. "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't want to see that look in your eyes," he said softly. "The one you have right now." Grace's chest ached. "You killed my brother, Eli. How do you expect me to ever look at you again?" He swallowed hard. "I don't expect that. I don't expect anything. I couldn't keep lying to you. You deserve to know." She took a shaky breath. "Was it really an accident?" Eli nodded. His voice cracked as he spoke. "It was supposed to be a simple robbery. I was desperate, broke, and stupid. Your brother was at the wrong place at the wrong time. The gun went off when he tried to help the cashier. I swear I didn't mean to hurt him. But I did, and I'll never forgive myself for that." Grace's tears spilled over. "You took everything from me. I know. I prayed for years to forgive the man who killed Luke," she said, her voice breaking. "And all this time, it was you. The one person I started to trust again." Eli's eyes filled with tears. "Grace, I never came here to make you feel sorry for me. I came here because I thought maybe I could make things right, even if you never forgive me. I just needed to face what I'd done." For a long time, they stood in silence, both crying in the flickering candlelight. Finally, Grace whispered, "You should leave Cedar Creek." Eli looked down. "I will. Tomorrow." She turned to leave but stopped at the doorway. "Do you ever think God forgave you?" Eli shook his head. "I don't think he should." Grace's voice softened. "Maybe that's not your choice." Then she walked out, her steps echoing through the empty hall. Outside, the rain poured harder. Grace ran to her car, her heart pounding. When she sat inside, she broke down, sobbing into her hands. She didn't know what to feel: anger, pity, grief, love. Everything hurt. She looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "Lord, I don't understand your plan. How can you ask me to forgive the one person who destroyed me?" A flash of lightning lit the sky, and in that moment, she saw her own reflection in the rearview mirror. Her face was soaked, her eyes red, but beneath the pain, she saw something else. Compassion. She whispered, "Why do I still care about him?" Back inside the chapel, Eli knelt on the cold floor, tears dripping onto his hands. He whispered, "If you can hear me, don't forgive me, just take care of her." And as thunder shook the heavens, both of them sat miles apart, crying for the same reason, because love and forgiveness had become the same impossible thing. The rain didn't stop all night. Thunder rolled over Cedar Creek like an angry drum, shaking windows and bending trees. Inside the Whitaker house, Grace sat in the dark by her window, her eyes red from crying. The letter lay on her lap again, edges worn, words burned into her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about Eli's voice, his face when he said, "I'll never forgive myself." Every word echoed in her head until it hurt to breathe. When the clock struck midnight, she finally whispered, "God, I don't know how to do this. I hate him for what he did. But I can't stop caring either. What's wrong with me?" A flash of lightning filled the room, lighting up her tear-stained face. The thunder that followed made the whole house tremble. Down the hall, Pastor Samuel heard her crying. He walked to her door and knocked softly. "Grace?" She didn't answer. He opened the door slowly and stepped inside. Grace wiped her face quickly, pretending she hadn't been crying. Her father sat beside her on the bed, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You've been different lately," he said quietly. "I know when my daughter is carrying something too heavy to bear." Grace tried to hold herself together, but her voice broke. "Dad, you remember the man who killed Luke?" Pastor Samuel's jaw tightened. "I'll never forget him." Her throat closed as she whispered, "It's Eli, Dad. Eli Turner from the halfway home." The silence that followed was louder than the thunder outside. Her father's hand froze on her shoulder. His eyes widened, disbelief flooding his face. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice shaking. Grace's tears came again. "He didn't tell me at first. I didn't know who he was. But when I found out, he confessed everything. He said it was an accident, and I believe him." Pastor Samuel stood up quickly, pacing the room. "You believe him? Grace, that man took your brother's life." "I know," she cried. "And I hate him for it, but..." "But what?" her father demanded, his voice breaking. "Please don't tell me you love him." Grace's lips trembled. She didn't answer. He turned away, covering his face with his hands. "Dear Lord," he whispered. "First he took my son, now he's taken my daughter's heart." Lightning flashed again, and for a moment, Grace saw her father's tears. It was the first time she'd seen him cry since Luke's funeral. After a long silence, Pastor Samuel spoke again, his voice softer now. "Grace, forgiveness isn't something you do because someone deserves it. You forgive because hate is too heavy to carry." Grace looked up at him, her voice small. "But how do you forgive the man who took everything from you?" He sat beside her again and took her hand. "By remembering that forgiveness isn't a feeling, it's a choice. Even when your heart screams not to." She leaned against him, sobbing quietly. For the first time, her father didn't tell her to stop crying. He just held her as the storm raged outside. When the thunder finally faded, the world was still. Grace stood and walked to the small wooden cross hanging above her window. She traced her fingers over it and whispered, "If forgiveness is a choice, maybe it starts here." Outside, the rain eased into a quiet drizzle. The air smelled clean, like the world had washed itself new. Somewhere across town, Eli knelt in the chapel at New Hope Center, whispering the same prayer. "If she ever forgives me, God, I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." And for the first time in days, Grace closed her eyes and felt a strange kind of peace, not because her pain was gone, but because her faith had learned how to stand in it. The morning after the storm, Cedar Creek was quiet. The streets were washed clean, and the church bell rang softly under the pale sun. Grace walked slowly toward New Hope Center, her shoes brushing against wet leaves. The world smelled new, but her heart still felt heavy. Each step reminded her of everything that had happened, her father's tears, Eli's confession, Luke's grave, and the letter that had shattered her peace. Yet somehow, walking back to that place didn't feel wrong anymore. It felt like something she needed to finish. When she reached the center, Mrs. Carter met her at the door. "He's inside the chapel," she said softly, as if she already knew why Grace had come. Grace nodded and stepped inside. The chapel was empty except for Eli, kneeling at the altar. His hands were clasped, his head bowed. The morning light poured through the stained glass, painting colors across his face. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. Surprise flickered across his eyes, then fear. He stood slowly. "Grace," he said, his voice small. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to come," she replied. He swallowed hard. "If you came to say goodbye, I understand. I was planning to leave today." Grace shook her head. "I didn't come to say goodbye." She walked closer, holding something in her hand. A small wooden cross, smooth and worn from age. Eli looked at it and froze. "That's Luke's," he whispered. Grace nodded. "He made it when we were kids. It was his favorite thing." She held it out to him. "I want you to have it." His eyes widened. "Grace. I can't." "Yes, you can," she said softly. "You took his life, but maybe you can help me keep his memory alive." He believed even broken things could point toward heaven. Maybe he was right. Eli's eyes filled with tears as he took the cross, his hands shaking. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered. Grace smiled weakly. "Because I'm tired of hating you. It hurts too much to keep holding on." He dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "You don't know what this means. I never thought I'd deserve forgiveness, not from God, and definitely not from you." She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not forgiving you because you deserve it. I'm forgiving you because I can't heal without it." They stayed like that for a while, both crying quietly in the stillness of the chapel. Later, Grace's father came to the center after hearing where she had gone. When he entered and saw Eli holding Luke's cross, he stopped in the doorway. Eli stood, wiping his tears. "Pastor Whitaker," he said. "I don't expect mercy from you. I just wanted to thank your daughter for giving me a chance to tell the truth." Pastor Samuel studied him for a long moment. Then he walked closer, his expression unreadable. "Do you believe God has forgiven you?" he asked. Eli hesitated. "I want to believe it. I just don't know how." The pastor nodded slowly. "Then keep trying. Forgiveness isn't a one-time prayer, it's a lifetime's work." He turned to Grace and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You did what I couldn't. You found peace." Grace smiled faintly. "I'm still finding it." As the three of them stood in the quiet chapel, sunlight spilled through the stained glass, bathing them in soft, golden light. It was as if heaven itself had taken a deep breath. Outside, birds began to sing again. Life moved on. Grace looked at Eli and whispered, "Maybe this is what grace really means, to love, even when it hurts." And for the first time since Luke's death, her heart finally felt light.